Dr. Fabian Lotte, to talk about learning for brain-computer interfaces and brain-computer interfaces for learning.
So good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm a researcher at INRIA Bordeaux Sud-Ouest in France, so in the wine area of France in the southwest. And today I'm going to talk about the relationship between learning and BCI, and in particular how learning theories can be used to make BCI more reliable, and how BCI themselves can be used to study and improve learning in general. So as you certainly all know in this audience, brain-computer interface can be used for many different applications. And in my work, I'm mostly focused on mental imagery BCI, that is BCI that are controlled by using mental imagery tasks, for instance, imagining hand movements or mental calculation or things like that. So these types of BCI can be used for many things, for instance, to drive wheelchair. That's an example from EPFL in Switzerland, in which a wheelchair can be turned left or right by imagining left or right hand movement. Can also be used for health users, for instance, to control virtual reality application or video games, as you see on the right here, in which the user can move forward in a virtual environment by imagining foot movements. And more recently, BCI can also be used for stroke rehabilitation for people who are paralyzed from a limb following a stroke. Actually, these people have a lesion in the brain area, in the motor area of the brain, and BCI can be used to guide them to use that damaged brain area to tap on brain plasticity towards recovery. And that's only a few examples of the many possible applications of BCI. However, in practice, BCI are still scarcely used outside laboratories, and the main problem so far is their poor reliability. Indeed, they suffer from high error rate. For instance, for BCI based on imaging left or right hand movement, these systems usually make mistakes once every 5 times on average across many users. Worse than that, it is estimated that between 10 to 30% of BCI users cannot control the BCI system at all, depending on the BCI type. So if we want BCI to really deliver these promises and actually be used for all these applications that we saw just before, we need to make them more reliable. So how do we do that? One way, which is one of the most studied way in the BCI community, is to try to improve the machine, and in particular to design signal processing and machine learning algorithm to reliably decode the commands from the user, the mental imagery commands from the user, into robust commands for the machine. But there's another way. We can also try to make BCI more reliable by studying and improving the user themselves. That is, by making sure that they can produce clear and distinct brain activity patterns that will be translated into command for the application. Indeed, even if we had perfect signal processing algorithm, if the user is not able to produce these brain activity patterns that are used to control the BCI, then no signal processing algorithm will be able to recognize these patterns. So we need to train our user, we need to give them proper feedback and proper training tasks to make sure that they can learn to produce these EEG patterns that will be used to control the BCI. So unfortunately, that's the area of BCI that have been much less studied than signal processing algorithms. So in that talk, I want to focus on this area, and I will show you a few examples of our work in this area. So let's first start the first part, learning for BCI. So how learning theories can be used to improve BCI. So to start with, this is how we currently train users to control motor imagery BCI, that is BCI based on imaging left or right hand movement. That's a protocol that was designed in Graz and that is widely used all over the world in that form or in some very similar variants. So the idea is that the user are prompted to imagine left or right hand movement following this arrow that you see on the screen, left or right arrow for left or right hand movement, and then they receive this feedback, this bar which is moving left or right. So if the bar goes left, it's a left-hand movement that has been recognized. If it goes right, it's a right-hand movement. And the longer the bar, the more confident the BCI is in the recognized mental command. And so basically, we ask our user to practice with this feedback and to make the bar as long as possible in the right direction. So is it really the best way we can train our BCI user? So actually, we asked ourselves this question and we looked at the literature in learning theories, and in particular in the educational psychology literature and instructional design literature. In these fields, they study learning in general across many different fields like language learning, motor learning, mathematical learning, etc. and they find out and they identified some guidelines about what are the best way to teach someone a skill. And so we try to compare what we do in BCI, how we train our user, to what are these recommendations and guidelines in this literature. So let's do that together. First, if we look at the training task that we give our user, they are usually fixed tasks, so we ask the user to practice this over and over again. And I guess we can agree they are kind of boring tasks, nothing very exciting with this bar and arrows. In contrast, the theoretical recommendation recommend to use varied training tasks that are obviously more engaging and that are adaptive. That is, adapted to the profile of the user and adaptive to the changing skills and states of the user. So here we are not really doing the best we could do in terms of training tasks. Now if we look at the feedback that we give our users, this feedback is corrective, meaning we tell our user whether the mental command was correctly recognized or not, and is unimodal, typically just a visual feedback, a bar moving left or right. Here as well, in contrast, it is recommended to provide an explanatory feedback, that is a feedback that tells the user why something is wrong or right, to provide also some social and emotional feedback, and finally to exploit multimodal feedback, not just one modality, not just visual, but multiple modality. So here as well, we are not really doing a good job in optimally teaching our user to control the BCI system. So if we want to improve BCI, I think one promising direction is actually to satisfy this theoretical recommendation and train BCI users by providing varied adaptive training feedback and multimodal feedback, for instance. So in particular, we need to understand what are the factors that impact BCI learning and performance in order to be able to provide such adaptive feedback and such explanatory feedback to our users. So I'm going to show you a few of these results in that area. So first, if we want to provide adapted feedback, meaning a specific training for each user depending on the profile of the user, we need to find out what is the impact of the user profile on the BCI performance. So that's something we studied with Camille Genet. We did a PhD with me. And basically, we were wondering what's the relationship between the user's personality and cognitive profile, which we can measure using various psychological questionnaires, and their performance as BCI control, as measured using classification accuracy, how well the mental commands are recognized. So we train our user to control a 3-class BCI. We ask them to learn to perform left-hand motor imagery, mental subtraction of a 2-digit number from a 3-digit number repeatedly, or mental rotation of a geometric figure. And so they have to learn to practice these 3 mental imagery tasks so that they are correctly recognized by the BCI. And so we administer a number of questionnaires to these users, and we looked at what were the relationship between this questionnaire score and the performance of the user across multiple sessions. We trained them over 6 sessions in that case. So we identify a number of factors, but one which stood out was and is the spatial abilities, meaning how well the user can produce, transform, and manipulate mental images, which we can measure using a mental rotation test. So actually, this was significantly correlated to BCI performance. The better your spatial abilities, the better the BCI performance. And what was quite interesting is that we also find that in another experiment, in a pure motor imagery BCI experiment, so just left or right hand motor imagery, here as well the spatial abilities were significantly correlated to the BCI performance. And recently, just at the end of last year, another lab also reproduced these results and also found in their own BCI experiment with motor imagery that spatial abilities are correlated to BCI performance. So this seems to be a rather robust predictor of performance. And by looking at the literature, in addition to spatial abilities, we also found that attention, and in particular the attention capabilities of the user, are also correlated to performance. So the higher the attentional capability of the user, the better the BCI performance. And finally, another one, an important familiar factor, is the relationship with technology. For users who are anxious with computers or do not feel in control with the BCI, they will tend to have lower performances. So this means there are a number of factors that need to be taken into account in order to improve BCI training. There are just a few of them, there are more. For instance, Yelena is also working on flow. Maybe you'll mention that later. So I'm not telling you much on that today, well now. So that's some factors we need to take into account in BCI. Now we also need to improve the feedback that we give to BCI users, and in particular we need to consider the recommendations from the literature in instructional design to give better feedback. So it was recommended to provide multimodal feedback, so we explored multimodal feedback for BCI as well. In particular, we explored vibrotactile feedback. So rather than having this bar moving left or right on screen, we had these vibrotactile gloves so that the user can feel the feedback moving left or right on their hand directly using these vibrotactile tactors. So it's interesting for two reasons. First reason, it decreases the visual workload of the user, because when you interact with the real world, your visual modality is already overloaded. So if you have visual feedback from the BCI as well, it can maybe a bit too much. But also because it's stimulating the hand, it's also increasing the motor response. So we compare this type of feedback in a BCI control game, in which the user should move a spaceship left or right by imaging left or right hand movements. And we compare the tactile feedback to visual feedback. So you will see the point moving left or right in the same way that the vibration were moving left or right. And we could show that the BCI performances were higher with the tactile feedback, and also that the visual workload of the user was lower with the tactile feedback, because they could deal with more distractors. We also explore other types of feedback, for instance, social feedback, which is usually missing in most BCI training approaches in which the user is alone in front of his computer. So we try to train users to control the BCI by pairs. So basically, we design very simple games. They have to move a ball left or right to score left or right to the left or right goal. But they were training by pairs, meaning that there was a single ball which was moving according to the output of the two users, to the BCI of the two users. So we can train them either to compete against each other, so one has to score left, the other has to score right, or they can be collaborative training, and they have to both push the ball in the same direction. And what's quite interesting is that when we compare this pair training to a single user training with the same game, we observe that the users usually get better performances. But not all of them, only the best player of each pair. So the best player of each pair has significantly better performances when he plays in pair than when he plays alone with the computer. But for the other player, it does not change anything. So we improve half of the user of doing this way. So that's only a few examples. There are also other types of feedback we are exploring. Again, Elena will mention a new one later today. So to summarize on this first part of learning for BCI, basically what we learn is that learning to control the BCI could and should be improved. We should change the way we currently train our users. And in particular, we should consider various performance factors to design adapted and adaptive training. And we could explore new feedback, for instance, haptic or social feedback. But obviously, there's a lot of open questions. For instance, can we model the BCI users? If we can really find out how the user states, traits, and skills impact BCI performance, we can provide optimal training. Again, Elena will talk about that later. But then also, what is the optimal feedback form? How to present the feedback? What is the optimal feedback content? What should we give as feedback to our users? So that's a question we are investigating now. For the second part, which is actually very related, I want to show how BCI can be used to study human learning. And you will see that it's actually very related to the first part. Indeed, when we learn a skill, so any skill, not BCI in particular, this involves a number of cognitive processes and related mental states. For instance, mental workload, attention, curiosity, etc. And there are actually a number of learning theories that are built on these processes. For instance, the cognitive load theory, which states that for an efficient learning, the workload should not be too high but not too low either. Or the ARCS model, with the A standing for attention, meaning that for a successful learning, we need to catch the attention of the user. So if we can consider these mental states, we can improve learning in general. But in this theory, usually these states are measured in a subjective way using questionnaires, or in an indirect way using behavioral measures such as reaction time. And the nice thing is that BCI, or the passive form of BCI, so not using BCI for control, but using BCI to monitor mental states, could be used to estimate, to some extent, these different states, for instance, workload, attention, etc. So this means that we could use passive BCI to improve or study learning in general. And if we could use passive BCI to study or improve learning in general, we could also use passive BCI to study and improve learning to control mental imagery BCI, for instance. So in our research, we are interested into that second part, using passive BCI to study and improve active BCI. So I'm going to show you a few of our work in that area. So one mental state we have been studied is mental workload, so the pressure on the mental resources of the user. And to study that, we use this widely well-known task in psychology, which is the N-back task. So basically, the user is seeing letters displayed on screen one by one after the other, and we ask the user to tell us whether the letter that is on screen now is the same letter as the letter that was on screen n character before. So by increasing n, we increase the workload because the user has to remember more character and update them at each new character. So we try to see whether we can discriminate in EEG signals two back task, meaning whether this letter, for instance, is the same as the two letters before, or so it's the high workload, or zero back task, meaning a very simple task in which the user just has to press when there is a single letter, S in that case. So we build a classifier using machine learning to recognize EEG signal corresponding to high versus low workload. And we could find that it's possible indeed to discriminate these two conditions. If you use only 2 seconds of EEG signal, we can discriminate these two conditions, high or low workload, with roughly 75% of accuracy. But if we take higher, longer time windows, up to 2 seconds, we can go as high as 96% of accuracy to discriminate these two conditions. So then we tried with Jeremy, who is also here, doing his PhD thesis. We explored monitoring mental workload during complex tasks, and in particular, in that case, during learning to navigate a maze. So we ask our user to navigate either easy maze, so they have to remember a number of symbols. Wow, it's quite slow. Okay, it's supposed to be faster than that, but well, anyway. You have this small character, he has to navigate left or right to remember some symbols. So there are 2 symbols in that case, and he has to remember a number of paths. So that's the easy level, because there's only 2 symbols and only a couple of turns to remember. And that's the very difficult level. So it's supposed to be much, much faster. Sorry for that. But the user basically has to remember many more symbols and a much longer path in the maze. Okay, I'm going to stop that because the computer cannot follow. It's okay. So basically, we designed 4 different difficulty levels. So basically, it's a more complex and more realistic task than the N-back task, and we wanted to see whether we could recognize mental workload difference between these different conditions. So that's the results of the average of our BCI output across subjects, and basically we could see that indeed the workload was recognized to be higher in the more difficult task as compared to the easy task. So that's the average workload classification, average across users. But for some users, not all of them, but for the user for which the EEG signals are the clearest, we could actually do continuous monitoring of workload. So you see that's workload monitoring across time, and the color codes the difficulty. So the more red, the more difficult, and we see a higher workload, and the more blue, the most easy, and you see a lower workload. We show that we can monitor workload in complex tasks. Briefly, we also recently explored with Aurélien, who is also doing his PhD with us. We also explored new machine learning tools to improve that workload estimation. That's a very recent work. So for instance, that was the tools we used before, so what we call common spatial pattern and filter-bank common spatial pattern. More recently, we explored Riemannian geometry or convolutional neural networks. Briefly, we could show that with these new machine learning tools, we could improve mental workload monitoring. And in particular, if we want to design a universal mental workload classifier, that is a classifier that does not need data from a new user, convolutional neural networks are so far the best tool. Okay, so I need to finish quickly. So we also study attention. I have to be fast. So we also explore how to distinguish different types of attention in EEG signals, because there are different types of attention depending on how long the attention has to be, whether we have to ignore distractors or not. So basically, we design some tasks with stimulus to response to and some stimulus to ignore. And we could show as well that using machine learning tools, we can discriminate different types of attention, for instance, alertness from sustained attentions. So I'm sorry, I don't have time to conclude on that, but basically, if we can monitor these mental states, that's quite interesting for education, because we can compare objectively different educational approaches to see which one require the less workload or which one catch the most the attention of the user, for instance. And we can adapt the training to the mental workload or attention states of the user. So that's the very near future. And so to kind of conclude, that's a picture from the past. That's a picture from year 1900, in which they tried to predict what was going to happen in year 2000. That's a French drawer. And you can see kids which wear something that looks like a BCI, and the teacher, which is basically uploading the books directly in their brain. So we don't want to do that. That's a little bit scary. But basically, I still believe that BCI could be used to improve education by monitoring the brain state of the user. So I think I'm late, so I need to conclude. But I think that's a good conclusion. So if you want to know more on BCI, we have a couple of very recent books. The last one released just last month. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.